Okay, guys, welcome back to Chapter 15, Cultural Transformations. Chapter 15 picks up the religious theme of this transformations unit. We've talked about political transformations, economic transformations, and now we're going to focus on culture, specifically on religion and even some science. Several of the world religions that you guys have studied earlier in the year, such as Islam and Christianity and Hinduism, are viewed through the prism of changes of the early modern period. And other cultural transformations, like the scientific revolution, also emerged during this period. The Protestant Reformation greatly diversified the practice and expression of Christianity. The political and theological effects of the Reformation can be compared to other religious divisions that you guys have already studied, such as the Great Schism of the 11th century, the Sunni-Shia split within Islam, and the separation of Buddhism into Theravada and Mahayana practices. So think about or even emphasize the syncretic forms of religion, which involve cultural blending among differing belief systems. The opening image for this chapter is the Virgin of Guadalupe, a particular adaptation of Christianity within previously Aztec Mexico. Adaptations of Christianity and African religiosity occurred in the Americas, while a blend of Islam and Hinduism emerged in the growth of Sikhism in northern India. So we see it in other places around the world. Okay, cultural transformations, religion, and science. So today, Christians from Asia, Africa, Latin America all conduct missionary work in Europe and North America. This marks a remarkable reversal of an earlier pattern where Christians from Europe and North America sent missionary work to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And today, more than 60% of Christians live outside of Europe and North America. Out of Europe came two developments during the early modern period. Christianity became a global presence, and the scientific revolution fostered a completely different approach to how the world was viewed. And Europeans were central players in these developments, but they did not act alone. People who converted shaped Christianity. And science also met with varying receptions in other regions around the globe. Okay, the globalization of Christianity. In 1500, Christianity was mostly limited to Europe. Small communities in Egypt, Ethiopia, southern India, and Central Asia are some of the other locations. But there were serious divisions within Christianity. We had the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And they were always on the defensive against Islam, with the loss of the Holy Land by 1300 and the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453, and the Ottoman siege of Vienna, which is a Christian city in Eastern Europe, in Austria in 1529. Okay, Western Christendom fragmented, the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation began in 1517. Martin Luther posted the 95 Theses asking for debate about ecclesiastical abuses, and Luther's was one of many criticisms of the Roman Church. His protests were more deeply grounded in theological difference and questioned the special role of clerical hierarchy, including the Pope. So he combined a widespread criticism of Roman Catholic hierarchy and criticism with a theological message that faith, not works or acts or rituals, but faith alone was the path to salvation. And most Protestant movements offered little agency for women, in some cases even limited women's participation in the church. And Luther's ideas provoked a massive schism in Catholic Christendom. It fed on political, economic, and social tension, not just religious differences. And some monarchs used Luther to justify gaining their independence from the papacy. So the Pope was not seen as a even higher power than the king. And it gave a new religious legitimacy to the middle class. Commoners were attracted to the new religious ideas as a tool for protest against the whole social order in their attempts to gain social rights. And Luther really used the power of the written word. Luther and others emphasized common people reading the scriptures in their own language, or the vernacular, not priests interpreting the Latin texts for the masses. And combined with the new technology of the printing press, Luther's message spread throughout Europe in the form of pamphlets, and it spread fast. And many women were attracted to Protestantism, but the Reformation didn't give them a greater role in the church or even in society. Protestants ended the veneration, or kind of like a worship of Mary and the other female saints. Protestants closed convents, which had given some women an alternative to marriage. And only Quakers among the Protestants gave women an official role in their churches. And some increased in the education of women, and this is because of an emphasis on Bible reading. And the recently invented printing press helped the Reformation spread rapidly, as I mentioned earlier. And as the Reformation spread, it splintered into an array of competing Protestant churches. Religious differences made Europe's fractured political system even more volatile than what it already was. And from 1562 to 1598 were the French Wars of Religion, and this was the Catholics versus the Huguenots, a division of Protestantism. And from 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War. Intense popular religious disputes led to cases of popular unrest and mob violence in France and Germany. Many political actors, kings, and other nobility found common cause with Luther's theological revolt against Rome. And as religious, political, and economic tensions became intertwined, peasant revolts broke out in the German lands in the 1520s, and Catholic and Huguenot violence tore France apart from 1562 to 1598. And finally, the 30 Years' War pitted the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire against Protestant kings and princes throughout Europe who sought independence from Rome and the emperor. Now, while the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to the fighting and established the modern state system in Europe, it recognized the end of Catholic religious unity in the continent. Now, the Protestant Reformation provoked a Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Council of Trent met from 1545 to 1563, and they really set out to clarify Catholic doctrines and practices. They corrected the abuses and corruption that the Protestants had protested. There was a new emphasis on education and supervision of priests, a crackdown on descendants, and new attention was given to individual spirituality and piety. And there were even new religious orders that formed. For example, the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. They were committed to renewal and expansion. And the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church, faced with widespread revolt, called this council, and they really, like I said, set out to reaffirm its authority over doctrine and ritual and clarify those doctrines, rituals, and practices. While there was an effort to end corrupt and abusive practices, the church took a hard line against heresy and dissent, approving militant orders like the Jesuits. Okay, the Reformation encouraged skepticism toward authority and tradition. It fostered religious individualism. In the following centuries, the Protestant habit of independent thinking led to skepticism about all revealed religion. Oops. Okay, and here we have, I love this image. Let's look at this. Who are the figures in the painting and what are they doing? Well, this painting, actually, if you think about it, reveals a lot. On the left are 6 men in plain and modest black robes carrying books. They're holding a giant quill, which is symbolic of something. They seem to be positioning on the door of a fairly modern-looking building. But on the right, we see 5 men, 2 in more elaborate dress. And they stand below a figure in the bed, probably with some type of an illness. Now, the columns and the arches in the building on the right suggest an antiquated legacy. And the scene within the structure seems to suggest the various abuses and ailing nature of the Roman Catholic Church. So that's symbolic of what's, of the Reformation and the problems within the Catholic Church. So that leads us over to what we initially talked about over here on the left. The giant quill is supposed to represent the large support for Martin Luther and his 95 Theses that he's posting on a church door in Wittenberg, Germany in 1517. So who do you think, or not who, but why do you think the artist put a white swan at the center of the painting? Well, this is interesting. This might be the artist's effort to illustrate the origin of the giant quill and the broad support for religious reform, implying that the call for Reformation has its roots in the grace of God's creation, which I think is a very interesting perspective. And what seems to be happening in the background? The sky in the background in the painting appears to be showing the light of heaven. I don't see that. And this may imply that the painter believed that the Reformation sparked by Luther was supported and approved by God as they continue to fight each other during these wars of religion. Okay. In this map, we show, initially this was all Catholic, other than the Eastern Orthodox Christians over here. And we see a heavily dominant Protestant influence in that darker orange. And then the lighter orange is still some Protestant influence, but also a still presence of Catholicism. Of course, in France, that's where we talked about the Catholics and the Huguenots. But you can really see what's going on in the Holy Roman Empire and what is now Germany. And many of these German princes and their constant fighting with each other for power while using the church to support and justify their revolts against the church and the Pope. So this is a very good map that shows you a lot of what's going on here. And Wittenberg here is where that church is that Luther posted his 95 Theses on. Okay. Christianity outward bound. So Christianity motivated and benefited from European expansion. The Spaniards and Portuguese saw overseas expansion as a continuation of the crusading tradition, and explorers combined religious and material interests. So it was kind of like a search of Christians and spices. This phrase was Vasco da Gama's response to Hindu South Asian merchants and princes who asked why the Portuguese had sailed to India in search of Christians and spices. And the phrase indicates the close connection between the Iberians' imperial expansion, Iberians being the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, which was a combination of feudal, crusading, and merchant activity, and the spread of Christianity. And in the 16th century, Catholicism became a world religion, but it was also an imperial religion as well. And so that brings us to the imperialism made the globalization of Christianity possible. Settlers and traders brought their religion with them. Missionaries, mostly Catholic, were very active in spreading Christianity. And the missionaries were not successful in Spanish America and the Philippines. That's important to note. As it spread through the world via colonization, the specific individuals who spread the faith were missionaries and religious dissenters seeking to build their own communities. So while Catholic missionaries dominated the first group and found success in the New World, in the Philippines, Protestant pilgrims fled to North America and established settler colonies in New England. Okay, and here is another important map. I believe you guys are familiar with some of these maps that you did on your map test earlier this 6 weeks. But here we see in orange the new Christian presence, and in green we see this is where Christianity had originated before. Right? Remember, we've already learned about the Christian Coptic Church in Egypt and that different form of Christian Orthodox in Ethiopia. But we really see a strong presence as it spreads east into Russia, even parts of India, with a minor Catholic presence there, and a minor Catholic presence in China. But really, the Catholic Church expands into Central and South America, while the Protestants search for new lands and spread their missionary work to North America, specifically New England. Now, France, their area is predominantly Catholic, while the British are Protestant. Okay, conversion and adaptation in Spanish America. The process of population collapse, conquest, and resettlement made Native Americans receptive to the conquering religion. Europeans claimed exclusive religious truth, tried to destroy those traditional religious practices instead of accommodating to them. And the occasional campaigns of destruction against the old religions were pretty brutal. There were some overt resistance movements, and the spectacular collapse of the Aztec and Incan empires led many Spanish and indigenous people to believe that the God of the Christians must be stronger than the traditional gods of the Americas. And millions converted. They were baptized throughout the New World. And while this was nothing new, as conquest in the Americas had long been associated with the right to impose the conqueror's pantheon of gods, the tolerance of the monotheist Iberians, really is seen in their refusal to recognize the existence of the pagan deities or even allow local rituals of the indigenous peoples. And this was a break with precedent. And like I said, there were some resistance movements in response to the foreign conquest. Resistors often used the revival of pre-Hispanic religious tradition as a method of mobilization. In Peru in the 1560s, there was this dancing sickness movement, including traveling teachers and performers who promised that the Andean gods would inflict illnesses upon the Spanish and restore the old order. All right, let's talk about blending two religious traditions as being more common. The local gods of Huacas remained influential. The immigrant Christianity took on patterns of pre-Christian life, and the Christian saints took on functions of pre-colonial gods. So we see a heavy mix or blending of indigenous religions with Christianity. And the leader of the church staff, or the fiscal, was a prestigious native who carried on the role of earlier religious specialists. And many rituals survived, often with some Christian influence. And so as the institutions of the Catholic Church offered new opportunities for women to assume roles of leadership and authority, indigenous American women who had once served as priestesses found themselves forced out of religious roles in this new society. And that said, the popular veneration of the Virgin Mary spread rapidly through the Americas as it resonated with notions of divine motherhood. And the syncretism was a religious blending of Iberian and indigenous traditions. Throughout the Spanish colonies, aspects of Catholicism, such as the cult of various saints, fused with local traditions, rituals, and spiritual figures such as the Andean Huacas. I was talking about it earlier. And the result was a Mexican or Andean variant of Christianity that showed clear distinctions from Christian practices and patterns that existed in Spain. All right, let's look at the Asian comparison. China and the Jesuits. So Christianity reached China in the powerful, prosperous Ming and Qing dynasties. And this called for a different missionary strategy. The Ming was 1368 to 1644, and the Qing was 1644 to 1912. Two long existing empires. And you could see, noting the time period, the Ming were the ones that overthrew the Mongols. And as the Ming dynasty was declining, the Qing dynasty began. Like I said, this called for a completely different missionary strategy. They needed government permission for operation. And so the Jesuits especially targeted the official Chinese elite. Now, there was no mass conversion in China, and some scholars and officials converted. And the Jesuits were appreciated for mathematical, astronomical, technological, and cartographical skills. And the missionary efforts gained about 200,000 to 300,000 converts within 250 years. So unlike the Americas, where powerful states collapsed with the arrivals of Europeans, China had two strong and wealthy dynasties, and the nation was never in danger of being taken over by the West before 1800. China's political resilience was unparalleled in its cultural strength, including the socio-political philosophy of Confucianism, which arguably achieved a spiritual significance for some. Others found their spiritual needs satisfied by the centuries-old Buddhist and Taoist traditions and practices. Aside from a few 100,000 converts and a population of about 300 million, Christianity did not find a way to get a foothold in China. So the missionaries didn't offer much that the Chinese needed. Christianity was kind of unappealing as an all-or-nothing religion that would call for a rejection of much of the Chinese culture that many Chinese people find pride in and hold dear. So in the early 18th century, the papacy and other missionary orders opposed Jesuit accommodation, the Jesuit accommodation policy. Now, there was one Catholic Christian missionary, Matteo Ricci, that traveled to China, and he and the other Jesuits targeted, like I said, the elites in the Chinese court. And to convert the Chinese, they studied Chinese culture, literature, and traditions and made accommodations to make Christianity more palatable, which was unthinkable in the Americas. There was no way they were going to accommodate or adjust to those indigenous religions in the Americas. Remember, it was the indigenous peoples and the natives that kind of combined or syncretized these religions. This didn't happen in China. The Chinese court found just the technical skills, like I said, the astronomy and the map making of the Jesuits to be interesting and useful. And Emperor Kangxi and the Pope, in the early 1700s, the Pope sought to eliminate the Jesuit concessions to Chinese ancestor veneration as idolatry. And this attack on a central feature of the Chinese socio-political order of Confucianism really angered Emperor Kangxi, and who put an end to the tolerance of Christian missionaries and the privileged place of the Jesuits within the Chinese court. And that sums up section 1 of the cultural transformations. And that was our look at the globalization of Christianity. I'll see you again for persistence and change in Afro-Asian cultural traditions.